Well, welcome everyone. My name is Ling. I'm the National Lead of the work of the Charter for Compassion in Australia, and I'm pleased to be introducing a fellow member of the Australian Compassion Council, Dr. Debbie Ling. And Debbie's going to speak with us today about the work she's doing on common humanity. This is the second contribution from Australia to the Martin Luther King 40 Days of Peace, and we're very pleased to be contributing to this important global peace event at a time when the world is so unsettled. First, I want to acknowledge the Indigenous lands on which I am situated, the Wathaurong lands of the Kulin Nation, paying respect to elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and indeed all Indigenous peoples with us today around the world. So Debbie, as I mentioned, Debbie's speaking with us about common humanity. The perspective of common humanity is so important today in today's world because, as Debbie will outline, it leads to a sense of connectedness to all people and to an understanding of how, as humans, our lives are interdependent with others. Debbie is a lecturer in the Social Work Department at Monash University here in Victoria and a key contributor to the Monash Centre for Consciousness and Contemplative Studies. Debbie is also a member of the Epworth Monash Rehabilitation Medicine Research Unit. Debbie's PhD research on compassion produced empirical evidence that the perception of common humanity leads to an increase in compassion in healthcare workers. She also trialled and evaluated a single session compassion training intervention, which has been published and has attracted international attention. And as I mentioned, Debbie is a member of the Australian Compassion Council. So welcome, Debbie, and I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn. And it's a great honour to be here in this event. And so today I'll be talking about common humanity, and just to let people know the structure of today. So I'll be speaking about four things. So firstly, what is common humanity? Then secondly, why it's important. Thirdly, some of the research around common humanity. And then fourth, some of the training approaches and how to foster common humanity. And I will be showing a couple of short videos that go for 4 to 5 minutes during this presentation. And we'll have Q&A at the end as well. So feel free for people either to put your questions into chat or you can ask them at the end. So I'll start off now first with what is common humanity. So common humanity is, essentially the sense and recognition and understanding that everyone wishes to be happy, no one wishes to suffer. So at that basic level of humans, we all want the same things. We want we have the same basic needs. It's also a recognition of the universality of vulnerability to suffering. And I guess COVID's really heightened that, in that any of us can get sick at any time. Certainly around the world with the pandemic, we're all vulnerable to it, which has been a very challenging time. And thirdly, with common humanity, it's very much a sense of heightening our interconnectedness or interdependence with others. So in Africa, there's the concept of Ubuntu, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, when he won the Templeton Prize in 2013, he highlighted how we're human through our relationship with others. And he was saying even the language we learn to speak, it depends on what part of the world we live in, what language the people around us are speaking. And obviously babies are completely vulnerable when they're born, and it requires multiple resources to raise them. And so this concept of interdependence or interconnectedness is absolutely woven through common humanity. And you'll see in different aspects of my talk today, I'll sort of touch back on that because it's something that's really important in helping heighten this understanding of common humanity. Also, as we know, the golden rule, something that's been mentioned across major religions and ethical traditions going back thousands of years, do unto others as you would have done to yourself. So we find that the concept of common humanity, it pops up across philosophy, medicine, politics, psychology. So it's a sort of very pervasive concept. And what's exciting these days is where there's research starting to filter out into how we can foster and promote common humanity. So I'll just talk now a little bit about why it's important. So the perception of common humanity is considered the most pro-social, inclusive approach to view someone else. So everyone becomes part of the in-group because we're all viewing other humans as just like me. This person wishes to be happy and not to suffer. And that's a phrase that Thubten Jinpa wrote about in a book that he wrote on compassion, and Jinpa helped establish the Stanford Center for Compassion and Altruism Research in Education. And it's a great phrase to hold on to, just to heighten common humanity. And you'll hear when I talk a bit about how to foster and train in this sense of common humanity, little slogans like that can be helpful when we're interacting with others. Just trying to remember that fundamental similarity we have, and certainly things like the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Item 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, absolutely gets back to that idea of honouring each other's basic humanity. Certainly in the research world, there's a sense that people who have this perception of common humanity, it's the basis for unbiased universal compassion. So we normally have compassion for our close others, but certainly it's ideal when people can have care and compassion towards anyone they meet. And so one of the main researchers who brought the term common humanity into sort of more prominence was a political scientist, Kristen Renwick Monroe. And you might be able to see it. She wrote this book, The Heart of Altruism, Perceptions of a Common Humanity, in the late 90s. And she was very interested as to why rescuers in Nazi-occupied Europe in World War II, there were certain rescuers who risked their own lives to rescue or hide people who were Jewish. And she was curious as to why they took such a great risk to do that, risk of their own lives, their family lives. And so she interviewed a range of these rescuers. And she found, to her great surprise, there was only one common theme. So it wasn't whether the rescuers knew the person who was Jewish or whether the rescuers were rich or poor or lived in the same neighbourhood. What she found, to her surprise, was she said all the rescuers had one shared trait, if you like, and it was that they all held this perception of common humanity, this sense that if another human being just like me is suffering, you go and help. And so she wrote a book about it, and it created a lot more attention. And I guess it shows, she says in her book, how one's perspective is so critical. And in this case, people holding this perspective, this strong perspective of common humanity, it motivated them to do altruistic actions and at considerable personal cost to themselves. So I'll move on now to some of the research around common humanity and just what it's saying, because it's a very interesting and encouraging space we're in right now. And certainly in my PhD, which I completed a couple of years ago, when I went to look at the literature around common humanity and compassion, it was very apparent that there had been multiple researchers from a whole range of disciplines over decades talking about this concept of common humanity. But there'd been an absence of empirical studies looking to try and research and measure the impact of it. So in my PhD, I was looking at investigating how the perception of common humanity impacted on compassion in healthcare workers. And I showed some healthcare workers some common humanity videos, or videos that capture this sense of common humanity, understanding some of our basic similarities, and used validated scales or surveys to pre and post to see the impact that it had on health professionals' levels of compassion. And what we found is viewing common humanity increased the healthcare workers' level of compassion. And so I'll show a type of video that I use in this training in a minute. just so that you can get a sense of the impact of viewing this material. In terms of other key research too, it's important to note that largely out of the ability of research now to do things like functional MRI brain scans, and there's been more opportunity to investigate the behaviour of young children and sort of group membership. What we're finding is it's called the social brain hypothesis that's largely spoken about perhaps for the last 20 years. And it's the recognition that humans, we are social beings, social animals, and we're born wired to have care, connection and compassion for each other. And it's believed to have an evolutionary focus. So just for survival, as mentioned earlier, babies are born completely helpless. And so it takes an enormous amount of resources, caregivers, others to look after and care for the baby and young child for many years to make sure they get to adulthood. And so there's a recognition that it's inbuilt deep into our nature, this sense of being able to connect with others. So we know that babies and young children can connect with multiple others, and just that strong caring instinct. And I mention this because it's understood that it's something innate that we're born with. Obviously, a lot of the training approaches are coming at it from the perspective that we've all got this innate evolutionary tendency to be able to care and connect to others, and it can be strengthened by certain training approaches or fostering certain viewpoints. So that's a very important comment to make. There's increasingly a lot of research in this sort of what I would call pro-social area, looking at the impact of compassion, forgiveness, gratitude, and also the recognition that these pro-social qualities fire off positive neural networks in the brain. So it's actually better for our well-being. And as we know, even from common sense, if people are have a lot of experiencing anger or resentment, that's negative to our health. So there's a lot of interest these days in cultivating and strengthening pro-social approaches and things like how to strengthen common humanity. There's just briefly a couple of other studies. The Harvard Adult Development Study is the longest running longitudinal study in the world. It started in the 1940s in World War II. And I think to date, there's been 724 people through this study. And originally it was comparing, I think it was university students. So they were a cohort who were doing well enough to be at university in the war years. And they were compared against another cohort from Boston, from a lower socioeconomic area. And these two cohorts of men were tested every 2 years of their life. There was a battery of tests. There were not just surveys, but taking blood samples, blood pressure, testing lots of things. And the interesting finding from this study, which has been going for such a long time, is that there is one very important factor for health and happiness, and that is the quality of people's social connections. So irrespective of which group they were in, what happened in their lives, it's the quality of social connections that's the most single important factor. And there's a great TED talk by the fourth study director, Robert Waldinger. I think if you Google what makes a good life, it's where he talks briefly in about 10 minutes of findings from this study. And just briefly, some last little sort of key research is we know now, there's actually been researchers for many years looking at group membership, or how we view sort of in-group, out-group membership. And we know from research that group membership's malleable. People can change their sense of what groups they belong to. And I guess a mundane example would be some people who might be very enthusiastic about following a sporting club. People can change, the clubs that they barrack for. And so we know that group membership's malleable or changeable. So that's very important in terms of this perception of common humanity. It leads one to suggest as a researcher that it's very important to keep persisting with trying to promote this sense of common humanity. And if people can have that as their default group membership, and particularly when they're looking at any other humans, to see that we're all part of this human race, just like me, this other person wishes to be happy, not to suffer. It creates a sense of identity and connection with the other, no matter how different they might be on some superficial differences. So it's a very important perspective to hold. And finally, a couple of the research areas that show this strong tendency for connection, cooperation. Frans de Waal, a famous researcher in altruism in animals, and he had done research showing even in non-human primates, I think it was might have been chimpanzees or gorillas, even if they have conflict, he was able to see that they actually also make up, and the group would come to sort of make sure that the loser in the fight is sort of consoled. And so there's strong evidence to suggest about the benefit of things like overcoming conflict or groups having this pro-social approach to each other. And then finally, a lot of the key research too that's very interesting is also on the behaviour of young children. So we're talking around 3 years old and younger. And research suggests too that children can have a very natural ability towards viewing all other children in the in-group and helping each other. And certainly in the compassion space, two of the key researchers who've been looking at the difference actually between compassion or empathic distress, Nancy Eisenberg and C. Daniel Batson. And Eisenberg was looking at 3-year-olds, and she noticed that if one of the 3-year-old children, I think it was in a kindergarten group, became upset about something, half the group may pick up on emotional contagion, which is pick up on the distressing emotion and start crying themselves. But the other half of the group, she noticed their immediate response was to go up to the other 3-year-old who's upset and try and console and comfort them. And so they had a compassionate response. They were able to separate out their own self versus the other, and they were able to recognise that the other person or this young child's upset, and they had this natural ability to want to go over and comfort them. So, in a sort of brief overview, that's some of the very interesting research that's all coming together around supporting this idea of the social brain, pro-social approaches, common humanity, heightening this sense of gratitude, forgiveness. So to give you a sense now, I'm going to pivot to some of the ways to foster common humanity and help even train it up. And certainly at Monash University, we've recently developed a compassion training for healthcare workers online course out of demand. There's been a lot of demand in the healthcare sector for helping workers heighten their sense of compassion, and also because it's been shown from neuroscience that compassion, a concerned response for the other and a wish to alleviate the well-being of the other, is a positive neural pathway for the worker as well. So not just the patient benefiting, but also the worker. And it's known to be associated with feelings of warmth, concern, reward, and affiliation. So there's great interest in how to heighten that, and because it's protective for the healthcare worker as well, whereas workers can occasionally accidentally go into empathic distress. So it's a bit similar to the kinder children, where a worker may pick up on the distressing feelings of the other, or if the other is suffering. Sometimes workers can accidentally pick up on that distressing feeling and start to feel distressed themselves. And so the term compassion fatigue is now considered to be incorrectly named. The term's actually considered to be empathic distress fatigue. So that self-other distinction is very important. But I'll just pivot now to how to strengthen common humanity And in the training program that we've developed, we have an emphasis on common humanity. It's a 4-week program. Week 1's talking about what is compassion, some of the research underpinning it. Week 2's talking about some of the barriers to compassion, because there are multiple factors that can disrupt compassion or make it more difficult. And then week 3 is specifically devoted to common humanity, what it is, how to heighten it. And then week 4 is sustaining compassion in one's day-to-day life. So I'll just show you now, there was a advertisement actually made by TV2 Denmark, which I believe is a public television station in Denmark. Now, the advertisement goes for 4 minutes, and it was made as a commercial, so there's obviously that to keep in mind. Nevertheless, I think they very powerfully get across the message of our connections to others, even people that we don't know. So I'll just share that now. We'll watch that first, and that's an example of some of the training material that you can use to reinforce this sense of our connections to others. So I'll just share my screen.
These people have a lot to talk about. They just don't know it yet. In a minute, we'll show them that they have more in common than they think.
Hej alle sammen. Tak fordi I er kommet. Thomas, vil du stille dig der? Og Aske? Thomas, du bor med din familie i et dejligt hus på Vinkelhøj 8 i Viby. Før I flyttede ind, var det faktisk dit barndomshjem, Aske.
Det er rigtigt. Ja. Fodbold i haven om sommeren. Og
det kan I forestille mig.
Ja, præcis.
Vi laver igen.
Mathilde, vil du komme herop? Hej. I to har faktisk stået over for hinanden før.
Okay.
Men der var I 12 år. Og det var i en rugbykamp.
Okay, ja.
Kampen endte i øvrigt 42-0 til Askes hold.
Tak for kampen. Ja, tak.
Inger. Mathilde, den nat, du kom til verden for 27 år siden på Christiania, var Inger det første menneske, du så.
Var du min jordmor?
Nå.
Det var så fint. Kan du huske det?
Anna, i 2012 er din mand ude at løbe en tur. Pludselig falder han om med hjertestop.
Ja.
Heldigvis er der en, der reagerer hurtigt og redder ham. Knud, vil du komme herop?
Just below the surface, a total stranger can turn out to be someone you're actually connected to.
Det er godt et stykke tid siden.
Someone who rouses forgotten memories. Like the very first kiss. Someone who reminds you that you're not alone. But that somebody else also has a bulldog named Prebin. Someone like Thomas, who put out a fire at Vibeka's place.
Vi er så taknemmelige for, at brandvæsenet kom så hurtigt.
Someone you've been gaming with for years, but
Kender I to hinanden?
have never met.
Altamon, mød Lil Salt.
Det er løgn.
Du er topfraggeren.
Jeg var fandme kendt den anden i 3-4 år, uden at nogensinde mødt den anden, eller set den anden før. Altså.
If we approach each other, we might find out that we share the same destiny.
Rana og Macha, I kom til Danmark fra Syrien for 4 år siden. Dorit og Jan, I har en lignende historie fra 2. verdenskrig.
Jeg har prøvet at være flygtning, og jeg vil aldrig glemme det. Det har betydet usigeligt meget.
Og Rikke, det var din oldefar, der risikerede sit liv ved at sejle Jan over Øresund den oktoberaften i 1943.
It's easy to mind your own business. It takes a little more effort to mind the community. But doesn't the feeling of having something in common, something that connects us, make it all worthwhile? TV2, all that we share.
Oops, sorry, I'll just stop that. So as you can see with that TV2 Danish, all that we share connected, I think it captures very powerfully this sense of some of the interconnections we can have with others and even people we don't know. And, you know, they get across some of the very powerful human experiences that people can have. Danish TV2, they also did another earlier version of that ad called very similar name, All That We Share, but it just didn't have the connected on it. And that was back in 2017, where it was more about group membership. And they initially showed people who superficially appear to be in certain different groups. So people who were sporty, people in suits. And then it asked very humanizing common questions such as who's ever been lonely or who's a step parent, and they got people to regroup based on those new questions, and very quickly all the group membership became interspersed because lots of different people were members of these new categories. So I guess it shows very powerfully how group membership and categories, when you, depending on how you view the other, or I guess the basis of the categorizing, so to speak, can shift things. And so that's where, once again, with this perception of common humanity, what we're wanting to do is to get people to easily look at everyone from the level of, just like me, this human wishes to be happy and not to suffer. That's where we're all in this together. And just with the Danish TV2 ad, the one that you saw, certainly I'm particularly interested in the potential of sort of easily accessible public domain material like that, that can be quickly and easily shown to a range of people. Obviously, my PhD research, I was showing it to healthcare workers. But as we all know, with the internet and media, there's, although there are at times polarizing messages, there's also great potential for these messages that show also the truth of our basic human connection and ability to recognize, you know, fundamental humanness of other people. So I think I would put a call out to there's sort of any researchers out there watching this, I think this is the way forward. Particularly, there's a lot of interest these days in social and emotional learning programs being undertaken in schools. And it makes sense. That's the way forward. A very powerful way forward, in a sense, is finding material like this and being able to show it to young children from a very early age and throughout their schooling. And certainly already there are some excellent programs around that do this. People might have heard of Think Equal, which is a program that's been around for some time. And that's starting off with the young preschoolers. And so reinforcing these issues of we're all the same. You know, we all wish to be happy. So that was it. So that training video, finding, I guess, suitable material that people might feel that they can connect with or can make an impact. But certainly I've been showing that video hundreds of times in a lot of compassion training interventions, and it's received a lot of positive feedback. I just want to mention now some other approaches that we can use to foster common humanity. And I quite like the word common humanity training or compassion training. I know it can, sometimes people think, can you actually train that? And I think certainly my response is that we put a lot of effort into, with young children, you know, when they go to school, learning how to share, respect others, use their words, not their fists. And so in a sense, that's training in pro-social approaches. And so I think it's very valid to look at ways of training common humanity and compassion. And certainly the research shows that people can be trained to develop these approaches. So another approach that is helpful and that we use certainly with the compassion training and common humanity training with healthcare workers is getting people to reflect on when they themselves have been on the receiving end of compassion and kindness from others. And it's not necessarily an exercise that we do that often, but I'll actually even put it out now. So it would be not necessarily thinking of core caregivers, but just spend a moment to think of anyone at any time in your life who's either positively influenced you or showed some care and kindness to you for whatever reason. So just spend a moment to think about that. It can be quite a fleeting interaction. It can may even be a stranger or not necessarily a sort of very key person in your life. But just spend a moment to reflect on that. And I'll share with you what, and feel free to throw it into chat if any of you are happy to share, but I'll share with you some responses that other people give when I run this training. So there was a young occupational therapist working in a hospital, and this was before COVID, actually in Melbourne, and she said that she used to get the same bus to work every day in the morning, and she said that the bus driver just had a different joke to tell every day. And she said it was such a small thing, but it lifted everyone's spirits because she found herself starting to look forward to the bus ride and look forward to the joke, and everyone would laugh. And she said it just set you in a good mood. So that's one example. Another example that I'd like to share, some of you might have heard of there was a British pop duo called the Eurythmics in the UK, very popular in the 1980s and 1990s, Annie Lennox and Dave Stewart. And there was a interview of Dave Stewart fairly recently, I think in the last 2 years. And what was fascinating was he spoke about back before he and Annie Lennox were famous. They were a struggling musician band, and he said they had very little money, no music hit. They were having hard times. And he said that they decided to go to the bank manager and ask for a loan. Say, well, we desperately need a few £1,000s for a guitar and a recording machine and music synthesizer. And they were expecting the bank manager to say no. But he said, fortunately, the bank manager must have been very visionary and agreed and gave them the money, gave them the loan. And that out of that money, they made their first hit record. And what I thought was incredible was this is an interview sort of 35 years on, when Dave Stewart's reflecting on this story. And he said, remember the kindness of those who helped you along the way, or remember those who helped you along the way. And he was saying that he used to send a Christmas card to the bank manager every year, and they actually became friends. But I thought it was just such a powerful comment. He's someone who's had a lot of success, but yet he had a very clear sense of the key action of someone else that helped them. And so once again, just looping back to that sense of interdependence and interconnectedness, when you're doing in the common humanity training, we're trying to get people to focus more specifically on remembering or thinking of anyone at any time who's actually had a positive influence on you, or where we've received their care and compassion. And I think it's an excellent activity to do, even in a more structured way. If you had more time, you could get people to discuss it or even keep a log. And it's similar to a gratitude journal, but just commenting. It's also, these things are helpful as an offset against some of the polarizing messages that we might get in through the news, or and I think this is what Archbishop Desmond Tutu was referring to about our deep interdependence and interconnectedness with others. It's very important to remember and reflect on that. And even at the basic survival level, all of us were dependent on the compassion and kindness and care of others, you know, whether it was our primary caregivers, or if you actually start to drill down, you know, the large majority of us would be fortunate to have had schooling, teachers, and even at the level of this webinar, you know, there's a whole lot of interplay of resources and people's time and effort to make this happen. And I think it's a terrific thing that the legacy of Martin Luther King is you know, lasting all these decades, and there's events such as this. So that's a very key exercise to get people to do, to reflect, for us each to reflect ourselves when we've been on the receiving end of compassion and kindness.
There's Debbie, I was just going to say, there's one saying that there's someone has a ferry worker who welcomes each person every morning with a cheerful greeting. So, so that's that was an example from the participants. Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you, Lynn. And yes, similar to the bus driver, and it's that not just is it us reminding ourselves or remembering what it's like to be on the receiving end of care and compassion, it's also heightening our recognition of the impact that our actions and words can have on others, no matter how fleeting the interaction might be. So in the training, another exercise that we do, so first we start off with getting people to reflect on a time themselves when they've been on the receiving end of care and compassion. And then the next step is you get people to reflect as well when you have been the source of care and kindness to others. And so we'll just do that now, just take a moment too, to just consciously reflect on any time in the past where you yourself have been the source of compassion and kindness to someone else, or even someone that you don't know. And so feel free in your own time. I think it's very valuable to also reflect on these things, because it helps heighten our self-awareness of how we're interacting with others and what we're bringing as well. And certainly in the healthcare space, obviously you hear a lot of patients talk about the fact that their experience of healthcare, it can be variable. Some people can have a very positive experience, other people less so, and there can be multiple reasons why. But you hear again and again, patients will say, and this is played out in the research literature, even let's say if it was the nurse or the workers are very busy and in a hurry, the patients will say when they got a nurse or carer who just had a very caring and compassionate manner, even if it was a very quick interaction, the patient will speak about how that really made them feel reassured. It made a big difference having someone who was attentive, understanding of them, showing that common humanity and kindness to them. And they said that made such a difference versus if someone else was didn't appear to be that interested. And of course, there can be multiple reasons. There's not really time to go into it today, but certainly in the healthcare space, which is one of the main areas I'm doing research in, we know there's issues such as resourcing, multiple demands on workers. There can be a whole variety of reasons why it might be difficult for a worker to get to compassion in that moment. But equally, with the common humanity training and compassion training, you're hoping to help workers boost their ability to, in that one-on-one relationship, be able to easily develop that pro-social approach to the other. Focus, remember the common humanity, easily focus on, just like me, this person wishes to be happy and not to suffer. Other little slogans that you can use are thinking of someone else as this person is someone's mother, father, son, or daughter. So once again, these humanizing ways of looking at the other. And I would also like to comment that, as we all know, it can be, there are times where it can be difficult to hold on to that common humanity perspective. a useful approach when you might find that you're getting judgment arise in yourself, or if someone, for whatever reason, is having challenging behaviours or behaviours that you're finding difficult. Marshall Rosenberg, he developed the nonviolent communication approach. He's got this beautiful 11-word quote that's attributed to him. And the quote is, "All unskillful behaviour is the tragic expression of an unmet need." I'll just repeat that. All unskillful behaviour is a tragic expression of an unmet need. And so he's speaking about how if you're interacting with someone who's, might be angry or behaving in a way that's difficult for you, if you look behind their unskillful behaviour or surface presentation, there's an unmet need, and it's usually fear. And so that's a helpful way too of viewing anyone else that you're interacting with, is to get beyond that initial difficulty and thinking, okay, so what's driving this? And this is where that common humanity slogan, once again, can be helpful. Viewing the other person and thinking, just like me, this person wishes to be happy and not to suffer, or recognizing that this person at this moment, they're suffering, they're in a difficult space. And just that reminder that we all know what that's like. And so finally, I guess I would like to say that there's multiple ways you can help try to heighten this sense of interdependence or interconnection with others. And once again, I'll finish up with showing another brief little video. This is actually, it was a Som Sabadell flash mob, so it's actually in Spain, and you'll see it involves Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. So that's just, but I encourage you to watch the faces of the audience because it gives you a sense, once again, of how people all around the world, we can enjoy similar things. So I'll just share my screen now and put this on. So. So just moving towards a finish up, the revered Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed away recently. I remember reading a book of his many years ago, and he said that be careful take care with what you read and with what you allow into your mind. He said these what you watch, what you read, what you think about, this is nourishment for the mind. And I think with, for example, that Som Sabadell flash mob video, it's been very popular. I think it was posted in 2012. It's had like 90 million views. Things like that are a very important, or can be a helpful extra reminder to us about sort of, you know, the universal value of arts and music and humans' ability to enjoy some of the simple pleasures. And so once again, just looping back to, with Common Humanity, it's very much emphasising this sense of our interconnectedness with others and some of our basic human desires for happiness. And I think I'm pretty much finished there, Lynn, with what I wanted to cover.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Debbie. Yes, it's a lot for us to think about. And yeah, I really like the way in which you've pulled together all that material. There's a lot of substance there. There is a question. I've got a question. Can you talk a little more about how you are using pro-social approaches? We know that pro-social, you know, there's a lot of work happening in that area at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's actually a approach specifically called pro-social. We're not specifically using that approach, but in terms of pro-social approaches more generally, which covers things like helping people view others as in a positive way. So common humanity, compassion, gratitude. So that's very much the big push. And there's lots of general research is talking about pro-social in general. So in terms of trying to help people get past stereotyping or in-group, out-group membership. So with Common Humanity, you're very much trying to emphasise that we're all part of one big group. So that's the sense in which I meant pro-social, just viewing the other in a positive way.
Oh, okay. Yes, and I think too that that issue of in and out groups, particularly, you know, we're here today for part of the 40 Days of Peace. So I'm just wondering about that, you know, as you were mentioning, we're sort of wired a little bit for connecting to others, particularly because we do take so long as a species to get to adulthood. So it's important for us to be able to nurture children for a long period of time, sometimes up to 18 years and beyond, but certainly until they're ready to go for themselves. So with the in and out groups, they become very important part of that process of nurturing. And I'm just wondering around out groups, particularly when there's threat involved. So you need to belong to this group because if you don't, you know, there's a chance of being attacked. You know, we're looking at Russia and Ukraine around at the moment. But I'm just wondering about how that sense of common humanity can be fostered at those times where, you know, where there is that sense of safety of belonging to one group, which excludes other groups.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you're making, Lynn. And certainly science has this sort of understanding of our basic motivation systems. And obviously threat or fear is one of them. There's also reward, or where we're pursuing certain goals. And then another core basic motivational system is very much this caring affiliation system as well. And so I think, Lynn, you know, I absolutely agree with you that, you know, the fact of the matter is that there can be difficulties, and as much as we're evolutionary wired to have care and connection to others, we are also evolutionary wired to be aware of when there is threat to us. And I think that the way forward with this is, once again, a sense of moderation and balance. I think one of the great difficulties for many of us these days is that so much of the media or the material we're getting exposed to is creating a sense of threat, perhaps out of proportion to the reality. And so that's where it's a great challenge moving forward to try and get the balance. And certainly things like Charter for Compassion, this 40 Days of Peace is a very important contributions to making sure that there's available there in the public domain, that making sure that people and children have access to the complete bigger picture. Yes, if you look at the history of humanity, there have been wars, and we don't, there's wars and conflict, but there's also this very strong history. Humans have survived for hundreds of thousands, millions of years. We've obviously got this strong sense of ability to be able to have care and compassion, repair after there's conflict. And so these are important aspects to heighten as well. And also, I think, to help heighten people's understanding that we have choice points as well as to how we react to certain things. And I guess this is where it gets a bit more complex. There's multiple factors coming in to what judgments we make of a situation and the perceptions that we develop or the perspectives that we develop. And once again, there's a lot of emphasis on helping to encourage children how to think critically, but regulate their emotions, have a ability of mindfulness, being present, and also that ability to filter out what is the accuracy of the situation. And I think certainly we've seen at the moment with the pandemic and COVID, it's been 2 years now that the world has been managing this very difficult situation. And it's been an example of how when people are feeling they're under sort of constant threat, there is some truth to that, but it can very much affect people's mental health and also their sense of in-group and out-group. And so I think there's no easy answer to that balancing of appropriate sense of threat and how one responds to that, but also getting a moderating, realistic view of what's going on, and also the potential as well. I will loop back to the United Nations Universal Human Declaration of Rights. That came out of the horrors of World War II. You had countries that were previously at war and killing each other, and then there was this sense afterwards, let's never go back there ever again if we can help it. And so countries that were previously bitter enemies sitting down and agreeing, let's set a baseline for an aspiration, if you like. And I think that's very important to heighten people's sense of aspiration or intention.
And I think too, both compassion and common humanity do require courage. There's a lovely little story in the chat, being reminded of a cellist in Sarajevo during the war who decided to put on his tux and went into the middle of the bombing to play the cello. A journalist later asked, "Why were you playing the cello in the square as bullets flew?" And his reply was, "Why were there guns being fired when I was playing the cello?" So I think that it does take courage. And we know that there's been a lot of work in compassion and courage. So I just wondered about how that sense, how courage plays a part in common humanity as well.
Thanks for that question, Lynn. I think it's a very important question as well. And absolutely agree that sometimes as humans, it can be easier to go into that threat space, or we withdraw from the other and sort of hunker down, so to speak, and close off put up a barrier between ourselves and others. And absolutely, I think compassion, common humanity, it requires us to sort of generate some hope and have some faith perhaps, and try to open up and connect with another, knowing that there's a risk sometimes that it may not always work out with the other. But I think the simple answer to that is, once again, we've seen throughout history, humans also do have the ability to get beyond conflict and to do bridge building, peacemaking, and that I think we can encourage ourselves and encourage each others to always take that extra step. And, you know, there's little quotes, I can't remember who it was by, someone said, you know, if you have the choice, err on the side of generosity. And I think that's also part of what makes us human, is our ability to have hope, forgiveness, keep working, keep trying, even when there can be very difficult circumstances, because despite the fact that there can be many reasons for conflict, if we actually also look at history, there's also been many times where conflict has been resolved as well. So, yeah, but absolutely having some courage. And I think that's where it can be helpful to watch some of these common humanities scenarios, because it can help restore one's faith in humanity, or keep looking at some of the Charter for Compassion material.
Yes, that's right. And one of the things, I'll just share one of the things that we've done in one of the cities here in Australia, in Ballarat, was to develop a book and share the stories of our primary and secondary school students in our city that have done amazing work. And just one example to finish with is a little girl who was, I think, 9. She went to Melbourne and saw a lot of homeless people, were very upset, came home, and her mother said, well, what would you like to do about it, rather than just feeling sad? And she said, well, if I was homeless, I would want to know that people were thinking of me. So this 9-year-old has since written hundreds of letters that have been distributed through our soup bus and even aged care and prisons, where she tells people that they're not alone, that she's thinking of them, that they should take courage, you know, take heart from the fact that there are a lot of people who do see them, because, as we know, a lot of times people just walk past and don't see their suffering. So we gathered these wonderful stories from our primary and secondary school students, and I think that sharing stories and bringing this into to people's attention is a really important way of as you say, gathering and responding to our common humanity. So thank you so much, Debbie. That's been a really wonderful session and an important conversation in today's uncertain world, where we do really need to think about how we connect through our common humanity. And you've given us some really wonderful ways to think about that and take it into our daily lives. Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, Lynn.
Good.